So this is the monthly meeting of the Zero Waste Advocacy Committee of the Northern California Recycling Association, or ZWAC as we call it. And we're trying to turn the word ZWAC into a verb that says no burn, no bury. So anyway.
Yeah.
We do a monthly show. We usually combine some sort of hot, interesting topic or interviewee along with a segment from the recycling archives. So this month we're going to do both because NCRA is having its first in-person annual conference recycling update in 3 years, coming the 15th of March, or as the Romans knew it, the Ides of March. So beware the Ides of March. So in honoring the resumption of RU, tonight's show is dedicated to sort of a NCRA highlights. We've been around a long time. We've done a lot of important things. Tonight, we're going to highlight 5 of them. Not that they're the most important, but they're the 5 that we're going to talk about. And we wanted to do this because the people who are going to tell the story aren't going to be around forever, as we found from the recycling archives. And these are important stories. And it seemed to be a good time to finally, if not get them down in paper, get them down in video so the story is preserved. Just as an example, I was looking up some things for the Portia Hills case that I'm going to talk about later. And I was realizing that my memory of some of the things is very different from what actually happened in some situations. And while I'm Irish and, we don't like the truth to get in the way of a good story, it's important to be historically accurate where you can. So we're striving for that tonight. And we're going to tell 5 different stories. Susan Blackman wanted to make an announcement, but I don't see her on the Zoom, so we'll skip past that and just start right in. The first story we're going to tell tonight has to do with something that everybody in Alameda County knows about that's involved in recycling, which is that there is a Measure D. And that Measure D passed in 1992, I think it was, and created Stopwaste. It created and funded it by virtue of a 6% surcharge on landfill tipping fees. And it's something that should be and could be replicated. But we have it in Alameda County. So how did that come about? Well, that's the first story we're going to tell. David Tam, who is actually with us tonight, was one of the founders of NCRA. We're not going to tell that story tonight, but really was the spearhead for catalyzing Alameda County Measure D. The context is in 1989, the state legislature passed its landmark recycling bill called AB 939. And you might as well think of 1989 as the start of the common era for recycling, because everything that happened before sort of prehistory and everything that happened now is what we're talking about. So in 1989, the state legislature says something remarkable. It says, we're going to divert 25% of the stuff that's going to landfill by 1995. We're going to get 50% diversion by 2000. We're going to tell the local governments that it's their problem of how to do it, and we're going to fine them if they don't. And that was just, I can't even tell you how much of a sea change that was. So typically, Alameda County recycling activists look at whatever Sacramento does and says, well, that's really not enough. And David Tam at the time with NCRA thought, 25% by 1995 is not too much. Maybe we ought to have a law in Alameda County that says 75% is required, 75% diversion. And while we're at it, maybe we ought to create an agency, a government agency that's devoted to encouraging recycling. And more than that, we're going to figure out a way to fund them. So David got that off the ground. And Ruth Abbe, who I was hoping would be on the call, sort of took it on at some point in one of her early starring performances. And it passed by 64%, I think, of the voters. So to honor that, Susan Kinsella is going to read a portion of the interview with David Tam that talks about the advocacy that launched Measure D. Susan?
You. Okay. Let me pull it up. All right. Well, in my experience, it's wonderful to come up with ideas for how to make things better in the future. And also in my experience, it's much harder to figure out the actual logistics for how to get. David Tam has made that. Am I getting feedback?
Mary Lou, that's you. There, she's muted herself.
Okay, I'm going to start over again. So in my experience, it's wonderful to come up with ideas for how to make things better in the future. But also in my experience, it's much harder to figure out the actual logistics for how to get from here to there. David Tam has made that kind of figuring out a prominent feature in his work. He's focused on how to actually get from point A to point B and how to raise the funds necessary to do that. So we are really fortunate that he turned his considerable skills in helping to shepherd Alameda County's Measure D from just some vague ideas to actual legislation that got passed and implemented, and now is a beacon that influences recycling programs all over the country. But I'll let David tell us about that in excerpts from his interview that was done in 2007 by Rick Anthony of Zero Waste International in San Diego. So here's David in the interview from 2007, interviewed by Rick Anthony. David says, I was very instrumental in getting the Alameda County Recycling Initiative campaign underway. This became Alameda County Measure D, a landmark initiative that passed the general election of 1989 and created a new agency called Stopwaste. Stopwaste's mission was to provide funding for reuse, recycling, and composting systems. Measure D funding came from mandating millions of dollars in wasting surcharges collected by the ton in all 3 remaining landfills. The surcharges, at $6 per ton at first, made conserving more competitive as a disposal option because it costs more to waste the same ton. The idea of wasting surcharges came from working recyclers and spread from there. I had not been involved so much in recycling at that point, except that I worked for community conservation centers in Berkeley from 1984 to 1988. But I became too much of a political hot potato at CCC, and they had to kind of phase me out, which freed me up to work on Alameda County Measure D in 1989. In 1988 or early 1989, a guy named Steve Bloom, who was a very sectarian, autodidact Green Party guy who liked to write ballot initiatives, came to me with an idea. He said, look, we're not getting recycling to progress in Alameda County, so let's have a waste initiative. I was one of the 9 players on the executive committee of the Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. So I reported Steve Bloom's idea to the other leaders for different areas. I said, well, we'd be interested in backing that here in the East Bay. And that was the genesis of the initiative because I had cred as an insider. I was able to get seed money from Sierra Club to start the campaign. The seed money was only $500, which wasn't much, but we were able to get a few other little smallish amounts and personal donations to pay a guy to do some organizing. Most of our time in the first few months was spent writing the thing. About 15 people did the drafting. Then once we'd written and filed it, I was able to get the Sierra Club to let us do a fundraising mailer to all of Alameda County. I wrote the mailer with Steve Lautsy and his wife, Teresa Eade, who was working with Mal Warwick and Associates. We wrote a very effective letter that got a 6% rate, which is great, and an average contribution of $22 from the 11,000 households who got the appeal. It was probably the best direct mail solicitation that's ever been done in the environmental field in the Bay Area. And that was supplemented with more money from Californians Against Waste. We netted $13,000, enough to put a number of people out on the streets, often at supermarkets, getting registered voters to sign. It still took over 6 months to get the necessary signatures to qualify for the ballot. My key role was to be Mr. Inside Guy from the Sierra Club, and particularly to insist that we hand address all 11,000 envelopes. These were not labels, so it was more grassrootsy. I'm very proud of that. It took 2 days for over a dozen volunteers to do all that hand addressing. The volunteers who had to do it basically felt like I was being an asshole, but I'm guessing that hand addressing the envelopes added another 1 percentage point to the response. In the process for getting Measure D written and passed, I got some ostracism, disrespect, staff undermining, and backstabbing, and I could name names, but I didn't get intimidation from the garbage companies or the garbage guys on the solid waste board or from the elected local officials. They were the Chamber of Commerce types who saw Oakland Scavenger and its successors as proper American institutions that should not be messed with. They didn't even have to intimidate me. They were dealing from a position of such political superiority and authority that the only way to counter them was to use the Citizens Initiative. And we did that with the Alameda County Recycling Initiative. Rick Anthony, the interviewer and always the organizer, chimes in here and says, right, take it to the people. And David says, and they hated me for that. And Rick says, well, of course, because you tell the truth. And David said, well, not just that, but because I helped disempower them. Right on, David. He says 62.73% of the voters of Alameda County passed Measure D in the November 1989 general election. It was called the Alameda County Waste Reduction and Recycling Initiative. It was administered by the Alameda County Source Reduction and Recycling Board of 11 persons. They were paid $100 per meeting to disperse the proceeds from a landfill surcharge by a prescribed formula. The surcharge initially was $6 a ton. Currently, it is $7.44 a ton. And remember that this is from an interview back in 2007, so it's higher now, I think. But it was generating over $8 million a year. Half that is automatically funneled back to 14 towns in the unincorporated parts of the county. All are required to fund various source separation programs with that money. The other half goes to the recycling board, which shares staff with the Alameda County Waste Management Authority. This board is now known as stopwaste.org. So there is $4 million of grant money per year available to this new agency out of Measure D. The benefit to the Bay Area and beyond the Bay Area is having Alameda County jurisdictions adequately financed on a comparable level to San Jose and San Francisco. Measure D's success is a good example that has not been picked up on by any other suburbanized multi-city county that I know of, but it could be and should be if the liberal politics were there too, like they are for us. Rick Anthony says, it's a matter of doing it and persisting until it's done. And then he asks, have you ever abandoned anything big that you started? David says, yes, that happened when I got on the recycling board. I didn't abandon my goal, but it got sold out from under me. As it happened, the recycling board legislation had a provision for inflation, but for the first 7 years, the recycling board did not employ that. When I got on, it was 2 years before I was able to get a majority of the recycling board to recommend that the Board of Supervisors increase the recycling surcharge. So I got them to agree that we would retroactively do a catch-up cost of living allowance, catch-up COLA, if you will. It was a 24% increase. So instead of $6 a ton, the surcharge should go up to $7.44 a ton. The catch-up was for 9 years, from 1990 to 1999. And after a lot of resistance, we got it through. Then we took it over to the County Board of Supervisors. But unfortunately, the executive director of Stopwaste and its CAO it over for 4 months, and then decided, well, we're not doing this. We'll just recommend to the Board of Supervisors that they not do it. And the staff never told me until after it was over. back to me now. So that last there is a cautionary tale. Even after you think you've succeeded, David makes it clear that you need to keep making sure that those successes stay secure. But my own personal experience from my decades of work in the product manufacturing and buy recycled side of the recycling system is that Measure D has been overwhelmingly important, not just in Alameda County, but all over the nation. For one thing, it was one of the very few local governments nationwide that actually had money to put into experiments and models and research and reports that they, as well as everyone else, could benefit from. And this research work was not theoretical. Instead, it focused exactly on the nitty-gritty that the local governments needed, since they've been responsible for interacting with their communities and businesses and carrying out the actual programs that make our recycling system work. So David, thank you for putting your skills and cred to work for helping to accomplish and then safeguard Measure D.
Thank you, Susan. We're fortunate to have David with us tonight, and I'm going to let's take that off the screen for just a second. And I want to open up for questions to David, but I'm going to ask the first one, and I'm going to tread carefully here. But David, Measure D was kind of your baby, so it's always a tricky question to ask a parent. Are you proud of your child? Are you disappointed in your child? So I'm going to ask you, are you proud of Measure D, disappointed with Measure D, or is there just more to do?
I was really only one of 15 parents. I happened to be the insider in the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club had tremendous political leverage by withholding or granting endorsements to candidates for elected office. So there were 1,400 people that are equally or even more due credit than I am. But the entree that I did have as the chair of what was then called the Solid Waste Committee of the Bay Chapter was to get mailing privileges to do the money raising. Which one other corrective that I'd like to make. The actual vote was in 1990, November 1990, not 1989. I'm sorry that correction didn't make its way to Susan's attention before this afternoon. And that's really the two major things. I'm as to my judgment as to whether or not it worked. Well, yes, I think there's going to be plenty of evidence that it is significantly increased diversion from landfill. What more can be said about it than that?
Does anybody else have questions for David before we put up a graphic on the screen?
I just want to say thank you, David, for correcting the date. We'll make sure that that gets into the transcript.
There are a few other little ones.
I have a few questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Tremendous feat.
15 people, not just me.
Was my cousin, Deborah Stanger, who introduced me to Dan and Mary Lou, I believe she was involved somehow back then. Anyway, my question is, how does the money flow? Like, where's the $6 levied and how? And my other question is, were other governments or jurisdictions doing anything like this at the time?
Deborah, she was one of the 15 parents. Am I off mute?
You are off, yeah.
Okay.
They hear you, I think.
Steve Loutsey and Teresa Eade, Steve Bloom and Ruth Abbe, Arthur Boone, Dan Knapp and Mary Lou van Deventer, and Deborah Stanger. So, Steve Brecky Brownell is another name that quickly comes to mind. We were all parents. It's just that I happen to have the inside track with the large environmental organization, with fame, and with a list to raise money from it. So I claim no special thing other than the accident of having put up with a lot of internal bickering about other untraditional issues that the club was beginning to grapple with in the 1980s. We're getting up to 1990. So, but anyway, the first part of the question was, where is it levied? It's basically collected by a report that's specified in the, well, it's basically been arranged that the two landfills, at that time there were three in the Bay Area or in the Alameda County, had to report their tonnage to Alameda County. And so from the county administrator's office down to the county treasurer's office, the $6 per ton was sent as a bill, and they duly paid it. And of course, they added the $6 a ton onto the cost of doing business. The other update is 15 years since 2007, when this interview was, we're about probably over $10 a ton now. However, at that time, in 2007, I think we were around 2 million tons. We're now down partly because San Francisco is no longer bringing its tonnage into Alameda County, but going to Solano County. We're down to about 1 million tons. So even though the surcharge is over $10 a ton, we're not bringing really as much in. We're bringing in maybe 10 or 12 million a year. I haven't looked at this question in quite some time, but there's ample funds there to basically fund things. David, anything else on that?
Well, if I could add, kind of pursuant to Max's question, I had no idea his cousin was Deborah Stanger. That's a wild coincidence, but the money went, all the money went to the authority or to Stopwaste. Half of it stayed with Stopwaste and was dispersed on particular programs in Measure D. The other half went to the cities by population. And one of the little nuances is that the money was assessed by ton of waste, but it was dispersed by population. So a city like Berkeley at that time that was ahead in recycling, had less garbage, was money ahead to keep going in that direction. And then the COLAs become more important because of the loss of revenue from San Francisco, since they do not bring their garbage to Altamont.
Great, thank you.
Bonnie, could you put that graphic up again? So this was drafted by Mary Lou. It's an ad for Urban Ore, but it graphically states the impact of Measure D. It has a list of the various cities in Alameda County, and it shows the amount between 1990 and 2014 that they reduced the amount of stuff that they landfilled. And that's pretty impressive given that the population has increased during that time by quite a bit, and the amount of stuff people have disposed of increased by quite a bit. So Mary Lou, having written this, what are your observations about what this shows?
Uh-oh.
Mary Lou, can you?
Oh, there we are. I will unmute now. Dan, you have to mute something. Okay. Dan gave me the numbers and I turned them into an ad, but the numbers were generated by Stopwaste. The numbers came directly from a Stopwaste report. So, because the report had come out just before we were going to do a big ad in the East Bay Express, which was a weekly at that time. So we were going to do this giant ad, and he gave me numbers, and I just put them into an Excel spreadsheet and sorted the information and pasted it up. And I don't know, it probably took me 15 minutes to write the text there, because for somebody in the recycling trade, the text is obvious to say. For people out in the general public, it is not obvious. So I made the ad, but it was information taken from Stopwaste's own report. They did not rank the cities that way, but I think that it's natural to do that so that you can see who's done the best job.
So are we really wasting that much less than we used to waste?
Yes. Well, as of this ad is from 2014. So yes, less tonnage going to landfill. And I think that ought to be this percentage of diversion. We used to talk, and Lautsy talked about this all the time at when the bottle bill was established. It's a bunch of bean counting, and it's full employment for bean counters. If we really just want to make the maximum impact, just measure what's going into the landfill. And that's what this does, is it measures what's going into the landfill. And yes, there has been a huge reduction.
David Tam would like to add one thing. I happen to be on an oversight committee for the Altamont landfill. The Altamont landfill 30 years ago was taking in over 2 million tons a year. There were two other landfills. One of them, Vasco Road landfill, was taking in about 400,000 tons a year. It does not have an oversight body over it. My surmise is they're still taking in about 400,000 tons a year. The third landfill in the Fremont area has been closed down, so that's gone from maybe 500,000 a year to zero. And the Fremont Newark Union City landfill is basically enriching Alameda County's coffers while going to Milpitas. But Altamont landfill is now only taking in about 1 million tons a year. That 400,000 tons or so that was coming in from San Francisco now going to Solano County. So we sort of, the result of arrangements that have very little to do with Measure D now are that there's still a huge amount of landfilling going on. I would not say that the Alameda County economy collectively has made a decisive turn away from wasting. It's slowed down.
So do we have a way to measure that?
Yes, somebody could go to the stopwaste.org board and ask for a report on what's going on with Vasco Road landfill. It is public information. Other than making that point to the 17 people that are on the 20-person steering committee or governing board for stopwaste.org, it would not, it's like a tree falling in a forest with nobody there. There's no press coverage.
Well, it would be really interesting to know, the two landfills over time, how much stuff is going where. That'd be great.
So David, you raised something I want to ask about in the drafting of Measure D. And I'm not here to criticize any of the drafting, but it seems like there is a conscious effort not to give any legislative power or real oversight of stop waste to the recycling board. It stayed with the solid waste authority. What was do you remember what was the thinking behind that?
It was split within our committee. Thinking of some of us was that it would basically take over the solid waste authority. Obviously, the elected officials who were a minority on the 11-person board were resistant to that, and at least one, maybe two members of the public side acquiesced in their resistance. So instead of the recycling board taking over the solid waste authority took over the recycling board. You can't find the recycling board on the front page of the website of stopwaste.org. You have to go look for Measure D to find out what actually did transpire. So it was, I guess you can say it was militancy versus pragmatism led to stopwaste.org being self-congratulated I give
But,
another, if I
know-
may, Steve, I'd give one other ballpark. I'd say probably Alameda County in total in 1990 was taking in over 3 million tons a year in landfills. Ballpark guess now is it's about half of that, about 1.5 million. And there's been this very significant population increase of over 20% in that last 30 years. So per capita wasting is down. Total tonnage is very significantly down. So it's not a picture of defeat. It's a picture of, let's just say, change. And it's very gradual.
But a final resolution answer to your question, John, is that there was a calculation that the cities might come out wholeheartedly against the initiative if we took too much power away from the elected officials and the purse strings on the money. I think the compromise idea was that the recycling board would be a policy leader or would have groups of experts who were not elected officials who would help advance things on a policy level, but not hold the purse strings because the authority was a joint powers authority. Elected officials were in charge of the money, but there was some active debate in our committee about that issue.
Well, hindsight is always golden, but I'm glad to hear the explanation. So does anybody else have questions for David or about Measure D before we move on to the next highlight? Hearing none, I'll move on to number 2.
Wait. Could I make one small comment?
And Bonnie, could you-
Dan, could you turn off your mute? Can you mute your?
I have muted.
Oh.
I'll go off again.
Oh, there we go. I just wanted to say that the measure was all drafted and we'd been working, and a lot of people had been working on it. Dan and I did not actually collect very many signatures, but we collected some, but there were a lot of, because of the nature of the legislation, it was a charter amendment to the county charter. So there had to be a lot of signatures collected, and we were on the verge of failing, actually, because we weren't getting enough signatures. And in from the sky dropped an angel by the name of Ruth Abbe. And she organized a signature gathering. And she pulled it together in time and pulled it over the top. So because of Ruth Abbe's organizing capability and gathering signatures, that's what took Measure D over the finish line.
If I could just add some very quick closing comments. One of the brilliant things in Measure D was that it guaranteed curbside recycling within 2 years in every city if the initiative passed. Oakland did not have curbside. Next door was Berkeley, which had curbside. There was curbside envy in Oakland, and the initiative pulled 3-1 in Oakland, I think, based on that provision mainly. The other thing is also about Berkeley building blocks. Berkeley had a 50% goal before the state of California. And, Measure D imagined a 75% goal before the state of California. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve. Bonnie, could you take the graphic off the screen? Thank you. So the second highlight we wanted to talk about tonight, I have to give a little context for. In March of 1994, the California Supreme Court decided the Rancho Mirage case, which I'm sure most of you have heard talked about. We're not going to tell that story tonight. But the context is that Supreme Court decision decided in one context, what is a recyclable and what is waste? And And at that point, there is a big competition over that. There's a big dispute over what's recyclable and what's a waste. And the court came out with this bright line test that if you pay someone to take it away, it's waste. Not going to argue about that right now. But we skip ahead because the waste haulers thought they'd lost that case. And they didn't like losing that case because they thought something had been taken away from them that was theirs. So they went right back to the state legislature and says, wait a minute, you got to change this. And they introduced a bill called SB 450, which if it had passed, would have given the waste haulers the exclusive right to all recyclables. And so anybody in the recycling business on this call would have had a different future. But it didn't happen because NCRA stepped up to the plate and because Rick Best, who was then the legislative director of Californians Against Waste, organized an opposition which looked like it had no chance to succeed because the waste haulers then and now, have all the lobbying might in Sacramento. And there was no reason to think that anybody could stop SB 450. But it was stopped, and it was mainly Rick's efforts, but NCRA participated too in a meaningful sense. Rick, for those of you that don't remember him, was an amazing person. He was paralyzed in the waist down, but he'd always had a positive outlook, and he had a very keen ability to bring people together. I worked closely with him in the 1990s on flow control related things, but his mastery of the legislative process was never shown quite as bright as the defeat of SB 450. And we don't have much information about that today, but we do have a memoriam that Mary Lou van Deventer wrote when Rick died. And of course, he's the testament to the adage that only the good die young, but he did die young, tragically. But Mary Lou wrote a memoriam, and I've asked Susan to read that because it really describes this major victory to defeat SB 450.
So in December of 2002, Dan and Mary Lou had just heard the night before that Rick Best had passed on. So Mary Lou wrote down this memory and sent it to Californians Against Waste, which of course is where Rick had worked for many years. And she called it How Rick Best Saved Recycling. And it goes, it was 1993 when the waste industry wrote and pushed SB 450 in the California legislature. The flow control bill would have defined all discarded materials as waste, giving the waste industry property title to everything people throw out, including all recyclables. The bill was well-financed, well-positioned, and was being lobbied hard. Despite its outrageous content, it threatened the entire recycling industry. On behalf of Californians Against Waste, Rick Best convened an unprecedented series of meetings to oppose the bill. At the first meeting, many of us who sat around CAW's table in Sacramento expressed shock at being together in the same room, much less working on the same side of an important issue. Recyclers such as NCRA and NCRA were joined by grocers, the Manufacturers Trade Association, the paper industry, anybody Rick could recruit to set aside old grudges and make common cause. One participant read a statement from her company's lawyers saying the meeting was not convened to fix prices or do other illegal things. As Rick laid out the agenda and chaired the discussion, a room full of sometime opponents with long histories warily explored the ways in which we could protect our shared interests. He kept the focus on issues, skillfully guided us around controversies, and generally formed a disparate group of strong personalities into a cooperative team. Rick's meetings called us to Sacramento many times. Under his light-handed and skillful guidance, we developed a set of positions, formulated a lobbying strategy, conducted lobbying days, and worked together. Old opponents developed new respect and even working relationships. Our entire group debated the entire waste lobbying group in a private meeting before the legislative aides. with an overflow crowd in the Senate committee hearing, and with hundreds of lobbyists milling in the hall, we lost the vote. The full Senate also voted against us. But the bill stopped in the assembly because the friendly committee chair tabled the bill. Recycling was saved. We all worked hard on opposing the bill, and Rick never once seemed uncomfortable with sharing the credit. But he was the central figure who started us working, kept us organized and focused, and provided the strength and perseverance that in the end prevailed. He was our center of gravity. We thank Rick for saving recycling, and we thank him especially for doing it with a contagious spirit of cohesiveness and cooperation.
Thank you, Susan. Mary Lou, can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
As a person at the time, I think you were there at this legislative hearing that you talked about in that memorial. What do you,
Ruth and I were the two NCRA lobbyists. Yes.
what do you remember about it?
Wait, which meeting? The hearing or the meeting and the hearing were two separate
The hearing.
things. The hearing, what I remember about the hearing, it was a Senate committee hearing, and the Senate committee hearing room, the audience probably had room for maybe 100 people. It was hot. It was in the middle of the summer. There was no air conditioning. The place was packed. There was there wasn't even standing room. The standing room was at the back of the room was totally full. And if you went outside the hearing room, there were the whole hall, the hall is like 20 feet wide, and the whole hallway was full for about 30 or 40 feet, crammed with people. The whole place was just stuffed with mostly garbage activists and companies and lobbyists and people who wanted to talk about the wonderfulness of why it's only fair that they own everything that comes out of the back doors of every structure in California. It's only fair. And if the recyclers take it out before the garbage people get to it, then they wouldn't be able to make enough money and blah, blah, blah. Well, they said all that. We said what we had to say to the committee, and the garbage guys said what they had to say to the committee, and the committee asked interesting questions, some, and not so interesting questions, other people, and then it came time for the vote. And the people who could be expected to be on the recycling side left the room. They left the room. And so when the vote happened, the bill passed, giving all the resources to the garbage guys, because apparently, my guess has always been that the folks on our side knew that it was going to pass, the fix was in, and they just didn't want to be part of the vote, and so they went away. But that meant they went away. They went away. And the bill passed the committee, and then it went to the floor. It passed the floor, and then it went over to the assembly, where it got stopped because the chair of the resources committee was no, not Nedgersley. No, not Bates. The guy who wrote David, who was
Chair.
who? Scher, Byron Scher. Yes, Byron Scher was the chair of the Assembly Resources Committee, and he just tabled it and sat on it, and it never passed. But that's the only reason it didn't pass. There was money rolling. I have never seen anything like it. There was money rolling down the center aisle of the hearing room. It was astonishing, and it was shameful how that worked. But that's what I remember. Very sweaty room full of money.
Ruth, do you have any memories to add to that?
No, that about wraps it up. Thank you, Mary Lou.
Okay. All right, well, that's two topics, and there's a continuing theme in these topics we're going to talk about, which is that how hard it is to do advocacy and how hard it is to keep things once you've gained it. So in this next story, which Ruth will tell, in 1995, Waste Management decided it wanted to expand its landfill at Altamont. And it was very politically connected. It had been in the East Bay for a long, long time in various incarnations. It had a majority of the Board of Supervisors that were supporting the project. And NCRA decided to step up to the plate and say, no, we don't think that's a good idea. And with a fighting against a politically connected project proponent with a lot of money and the support of the elected officials is not an easy time, or not an easy task. But NCRA took it on and ultimately stopped the landfill expansion. And Ruth, I'd like you to tell that story if you can.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little embarrassed to be the one telling it in front of Steve and David, who were probably more instrumental in the whole thing, but I'll give you the history and then they can make corrections. So I looked back, John, and it actually started in 1991 when Waste Management of Alameda County proposed a 196 million ton expansion. And to just give you an idea of how big that is, I looked up what their current they have about 65 million tons right now in place of available capacity, and that is supposed to last them, I believe, through 2070. So that gives you some context. Anyway, so 196 million tons of expansion. And then the significant thing was they wanted an increase of their daily capacity of accepting trash at Altamont from 11,150 tons per day to 20,365 tons per day, which was, our big fear was that we would be importing trash from LA basically in order to fill 20,000 tons per day, which is an enormous amount. And so the county zoning official, county zoning administrator, determined that 196 million tons was way too big. And so they and the Board of Supervisors approved a much limited expansion. And the Board of Supervisors was so proud to say that we went from a 196 million ton expansion to only 80 million tons of an expansion. And they did also reduce the tons per day back to the permit limit of 11,150. So that was all good. I mean, that was also so far so good. But the activism on the part of NCRA, the Sierra Club, the Measure D committee, Alarm, which is a local landowners group. And at that time, both the Castle and Cook, which was a landowner that owns the Kirby Canyon landfill, on which the Kirby Canyon landfill is situated, all became a coalition and sued on the EIR. And the key point, and David and Steve will have better memory than I do, but the key point of the EIR and the reason that we focused on the environmental impact report was because they were offering an expansion which was way out of scale of what was needed. Because by the time of 1996, when the Board of Supervisors acted to approve the permit for the 80 million ton expansion, we had already passed Measure D by that point. This legislature had already passed AB 939. And so therefore, the need was out of scale with what we would be generating. And then that was actually true. And Stopwaste has documented, and Mary Lou and Dan have actually elevated and advertised that since 1990, our tonnage amounts in Alameda County has gone down by half over 15 years, which is quite an accomplishment, right? So we really need to celebrate it and acknowledge that it worked, right? Recycling worked, and we really did reduce our landfilling. Now that's not the case statewide. So if you look to other parts of the state, Arthur will a lot of times tell us, what have we accomplished in all this effort, because we're still landfilling approximately the same amount that we landfilled in 1989 when AB 939 was passed, and the state kind of hovers around just below 50%, 48% diversion. And so, what accomplished, but in Alameda County, we accomplished a lot, which was the reduction by half of landfilling. And so it was really that key point, which was that this expansion was not needed. The Board of Supervisors would have had to identify, an extraordinary circumstance in order to accept the environmental impact report. And so they could not justify that. And then so the Superior Court, I guess it was the Superior Court, actually ruled in 1998 with the plaintiffs, and it included, or the petitioners, I should say, and it was the group that I mentioned, the consortium that I mentioned of environmental groups and landowners, and then also the cities of Pleasanton and Livermore. And then so we won, right? That wasn't the end of it. The extensive work on part of NCRA was the negotiations of the settlement agreement. So entering into the lawsuit and suing on behalf of the environmental impact report and then winning in court was kind of the beginning of the effort. There was an exhaustive amount of negotiation, and I think Steve, you were a key component. Were you representing NCRA for the negotiation? So
I think
NCRA,
that's right. Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah, NCRA, the Sierra Club, Measure D committee was part of the negotiations because they were part of the lawsuit, but they did not sign off on the settlement agreement. The landowners, Alarm and Castle and Cook participated and then did not agree to the settlement agreement. But the heavy lift was done in the negotiation where we were able to get some amazing things. One is a geographic restriction for the Altamont landfill so that they would not be able to import franchise waste from LA, which was the big concern. So the geographic limitation was, I think, the key issue. And I think that was what Steve championed on behalf of NCRA. And then some other things that were important to the folks living around the landfill, such as a community monitor. So the community monitor still meets. Some people in this Zoom call have been a part of the Community Monitor Committee, which meets and reviews from an independent third-party firm that reviews the environmental compliance of the landfill. And it may be one of the only landfills in the country and in the world that has a third-party organization that looks over the shoulder of not only the state, but not only the landfill, but also the state in terms of their environmental reporting. So that was a key issue as well. And then the other thing that we got was a open space committee, which had funding to actually fund the purchase of open space in the area surrounding the landfill. So a lot of Eastern Alameda County parcels have been purchased since that time. A big amount of money was raised through the surcharge that was agreed to by Waste Management, and so that has happened. A lot of open space has been, has been achieved, and then the Altamont Education Advisory Board, and NCRA has a seat on the Education Advisory Board, and people in this Zoom call have participated in that committee and have also received funding from the Altamont Education Advisory Board. We called the funds dedicated to that committee Donna's Quarter, after Donna Caban. Donna Caban is a East County activist, active in the Sierra Club, and she was another key person in the negotiations to for the settlement agreement. So, and then I think the upshot was, all in all, with the geographic restriction, with the community monitor, with the funding for open space and recycling education, with the goal of, eventually getting ourselves out of the business because there would be no more tons going to the Altamont landfill. In exchange for that, Waste Management got a 40 million ton expansion. And that 40 million ton expansion, if you can believe it, which was agreed to, the settlement agreement was finally signed in 1999, November of 1999. They didn't use that expansion portion of the landfill until 2019. So between 1999 and 2019, they were filling up their old cells, and they're only now working on their new cells with their landfill, like the 40 million ton landfill expansion. So, and that I think is supposed to last us well into this century. And then they'll have to do another EIR, and they will have to come back to fill up the rest of their canyon. But so what did NCRA get out of it? NCRA got a really reduced expansion from 196 million tons to 40 million ton expansion. There was a stay on the tons per day. So that's still to this day, 11,150 tons per day. The geographic restriction, which is really key, and the Community Monitor Committee, the Open Space Committee, and the education funds for recycling education, job training, which was significant. And as a side benefit, when the Vasco Road landfill came to the zoning administrator for their expansion, to their permit, the zoning administrator said, okay, fine, but you got to do the same things that Altamont did in terms of the funding of the committees and the other aspects to it. So Alameda County, which was, the entity that was that had approved the EIR, and so they were the ones that were sued. They are now fully supportive of course, the idea of really monitoring and restricting the landfills. So we have in our county, in Alameda County, 2 large landfills that hopefully will last us a really long time, because as we get towards zero waste and reduce trash going to landfill, we can make those landfills last. And in California, we've seen the phenomenon of 50-year landfills in Monterey and in Fresno become 100-year landfills because the amount of reduction of trash going to them. And so I think the legacy for NCRA is to be a part of something that has made a very big difference in Alameda County. So that's what I got. Do you have more to add, Steve and David and Mary Lou and Dan and everybody else?
Thank you, Ruth. It's important that these stories be preserved, and that was a wonderful telling of the story that preserves it. I know you weren't the only one involved, but when I reached out to tag somebody, you were it. But Steve, David, if you have things you want to add about this.
That's okay. I mean, Ruth is, as usual, Ruth was pretty strong on the facts. I don't have a lot of dispute with her summary, and it was very efficient. I guess I would add that not only did we prevent garbage from coming from LA, the words in the agreement are that only waste from Alameda County, San Francisco, which was already coming to the landfill, or the city and county of San Ramon and Contra Costa, which was already coming to the landfill. Those were the only places that waste could continue to flow towards Altamont. So our logic was they can have their millions of tons expansion, but if we do our work on waste reduction locally, and they can only accept waste from local sources, then it was a good settlement. There were those who walked out of the settlement, didn't like it. Ruth mentioned David was really critical on the open space quarter, was it, or 75 cents? Or
there was an initial on a 3-2 vote approving the 196 million ton expansion. Mary, the other Mary, the late Mary King, county supervisor, the so-called sheriff of open space, put in a quarter. I got it up to 75 cents. The 75 cents now, I don't know how much it is now. I guess it's over $1.30 for every ton deposited at either Vasco Road or Altamont. And there's already been expended about, I believe, about $12 million. And there's another 18 million waiting in reserve to acquire more critical open space in the area, the hills, the Pleasanton area and the Livermore Murray Township area. So Alameda County's open space needs are more or less well funded. It's like paint drying to acquire more open space.
One other last quick comment is that the folks at Waste Management were saying to us as Measure D activists, if this is a big regional landfill, you're going to get lots of money in your Measure D fund. But we stuck to our principles that we wanted, not waste coming from all over, and to work in our backyard to reduce waste rather than, make money off a bigger landfill.
There would have been tonnage coming in from Santa Clara County, and that's part of the reason for the Kirby Canyon owners, Castle and Cook, being a party to the whole dispute.
So I'm going to make an observation because I'm the host. It's great to hear the story. It's boiled down to 10 to 15 minutes, but one thing you can't capture in the story is the 8 years that it took from start to finish. What must have been countless meetings, what must have been difficulty even getting the people that were on the same side to agree with each other on the various important things. And I think this is all being done by volunteers, whereas Waste Management is paying everybody in sight to do what they want. So it's a huge achievement. It's a huge task. It's diminished a little bit by boiling it down to 10 minutes, but at least we've got it preserved, and thank everybody for what they did. Okay, well, next we have a hole in the program. Arthur Boone was supposed to come and talk about recycling update, which is resuming in live and in person in a week. And he has technical problems, so I offered to have him come here and use my system. And we agreed to meet here at 4:30, and he's not here. And I called him and left a message and haven't heard from him. So we have a hole in the program where we would have liked to talk about RU, because that's one of NCRA's major achievements. It sort of subscribed to Arthur's singular vision, which is we're going to talk about new and interesting things. We're going to have the people talk about that are actually doing it, not just people talking about somebody else doing it. And we're going to use the old journalistic euphemism that you have to seal it with a kiss, which means keep it simple, stupid. And that means in RU speak 10 minutes. You don't get to go over 10 minutes. So a lot of people on this call have been to most, if not all, of the RUs. I'm looking at Portia's box and thinking, Portia, could you talk a little bit in Arthur's place about how RU started and how it's evolved?
Well, yes. I was actually preoccupied with my child when it started. So I can't say much about it except what you just said. It describes it well. I remember that we were in government buildings initially, at the EPA for a while, and also state offices in the city of Oakland. But I can tell you the wildest story of all was that at a certain point, Arthur was willing to hand off responsibility to others. And we found out like 4 days before that the person that was supposed to confirm the the venue hadn't done it, hadn't arranged payment, hadn't signed the contract. And so Arthur went to Freight and Salvage and arranged for us to start to have the conference there. And it was just amazing. So at the day of the event, we had to have people come to the state building and be told, go to Berkeley. And I thought that was quite a feat. You all know this, but people perhaps listening to this in the future may not know that RU has been called speed dating, a form of speed dating. And Peter Slope of CRA has numerous times said, you know, you can come to NCRA to meet a date, but if you want a real relationship, come to the CRA conference. But that said, this is one of the most popular conferences, really, not only in the state, but across the country. We're famous for Recycling Update. And it's weathered some interesting things of late. About 3 years ago, we were sent an anonymous letter saying people of color, this person was a person of color, it was anonymous, didn't feel comfortable at RU, at Recycling Update, and gave some reasons why. And so this letter stimulated the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which I founded, and Alina Beckerman joined me as the co-chairs. And curiously enough, this actually put us in a position where we were ahead of Black Lives Matters. Or maybe that isn't quite the right way to say it, but we were working on this and have put on two national webinars with the National Recycling Congress Coalition and related to the National Zero Waste Conference, so that we, interestingly enough, are renowned for our work on the DEI, and it's a popular committee. And at this coming RU, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee will be the major part of the greeters team, so that anybody who comes has a friendly face to ask questions to, and maybe address some of these issues that this letter writer experienced in the past. I could go on at length about that. I will add another thing that once we were at the museum, at the Oakland Museum, and we were in the middle of a break, and all of a sudden people burst into the room, and this man was shouting, and it turns out it was a member of NCRA Players. And the other players came in and finished the skit with this person, but it was quite shocking and quite very NCRA. Does anybody else want to add something about how wonderful Recycling Update is?
I do, but Mary Lou, why don't you go first?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that Portia's story about having to find the new venue in a real hurry, it was even more time compressed than she indicated. It was 24 hours before RU that Arthur went to the state office building to check on all the arrangements being correct and so on. And that was when he discovered that no arrangements had been made, and somebody else was actually using the auditorium that we needed. So that gave 24 hours to scramble and find a different venue. And that was when Arthur found Freight and Salvage. And they just, it was so last minute, I can't believe it. And we had signs. I stood out at the office building with a sign that said, no, don't go here. We're not here, we're there. And give people directions for how to get there. It was 24 hours notice, the venue was changed.
Were you president?
So was I president? No, I was not president at that moment. No, somebody else was doing it.
Guess we could have blamed you if you were president.
No, no. There was someone who was responsible who shall remain nameless.
Yeah.
Susan Blackman.
Hey.
you-
Yeah, so this is a good time to jump in with what I was going to tell everybody is that you are all, the DEI committee is found a contractor to do training for us. And as NCRA committee members, you guys are welcome to, I was just gonna send this in. You're welcome to apply to attend, and I just send information in the chat about this. In fact, you're encouraged. I think, I can't remember how many slots we've got, but we've got a total of 25. So if you want to, get exposed and learn and stay current, it's something coming up. There's going to be 2 different days of training. So you don't have to do both. You could do one or the other. So please check it out, and we encourage you to consider attending. Thank you.
Susan Kinsella.
I just want to say, I spoke several times at RU, probably most everybody here has too. But I always had to laugh each year. One, it's always hard for me to try to say whatever I had to say in only 10 minutes. But Arthur would always tell us, if you go over 10 minutes, I'm coming on stage with a cane and I'm going to grab you, by the neck and just drag you off or something. So everybody really was good about sticking to the 10 minutes. And I always found that if I wanted to know what was like cutting edge in recycling, then RU was the place to go, because within one day I would get such a great overview that I'd leave and feel like I'd just been well educated and I was up to, knowing the latest and everything. And that would last for quite a while. So I always thought RU was great.
Thanks, Susan. So I want to talk about my first appearance speaking at RU, which was when it was held at the Lakeside Garden Center across the street from Children's Fairyland. Coincidentally, it's where Arthur held his 80th birthday party. But the first time I was asked to speak, it was there. And it's relative to freight and salvage, it was a little tiny room. Maybe you had folding chairs, you could maybe get 60, 70 people in the room. Beautiful room. I've been warned before going there that the NCRA crowd was kind of wild and unruly and unpredictable. Certainly true. Difficult personalities, certainly true. And I don't even remember what the subject was I was talking about, but someone in the crowd was ready. And they asked a question then about a then current issue having to do with the bottle bill and what kind of containers qualified for the redemption. And there was a big issue of whether, fruit drinks could be included or whether vegetable drinks could be included. And somebody in the audience asked me point blank whether a tomato was a fruit or a vegetable. And I'd kind of known about that issue. So I answered quickly, it's a fruit. It is a fruit. It's got seeds. It's a fruit. And then this person who had set this up says, well, what about this 1887 New York case that says it's a vegetable? And of course, there is such a case in 1887 in New York that says it's a vegetable. It's a tariff case. So I had to answer that. So it kind of lived up to expectations. Difficult crowd, unruly personalities, great room. And it sounds like with this difficult transition to freight and salvage, it's kind of an all's well that ends well situation. So I'm glad we're there. I'm glad it's grown. I'm sorry Arthur couldn't be here to tell about it. Anybody else have any recollections of RU they want to talk about? Okay.
I'll go quickly. I was the sitting president. Of NCRA when RU was invented by Arthur. We had done 2 conferences in a row that were kind of traditional themed conferences, one on the right to recycle, who's right, flow control, another one on energy, alternative energy and recycling as an alternative to landfilling. And I said, and I was fairly involved with both of those events, and I said, I don't want to work on another conference who's going to step up and do something in the following year. And so that's when he invented RU. He did it for almost 20 years. And per Susan's point, he called it from out of touch to up to date in one day. And the discussion in the bar afterwards is another favorite thing of mine when I make it to RU, because everybody's in the audience hearing the same presentations. You're not broken into tracks or broken down by different issues, but you only get 10 minutes, but everybody hears the same things and then come together at the end. So that's it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the bar because, you know, we're having RU in person again in a week. And because we, in the past, have offered green drinks to our attendees, we're resuming green drinks also. So if you attend RU in person or virtually, if you tell us that you did, you get a free drink, one free drink, and we're holding it at Triple Rock Brewery, which is just down the street from Spats where we used to hold it. So ZWAC is sponsoring the green drinks event this year. Come and see us for green drinks after the show. Thank you. Ruth?
Sorry, I just wanted to
Arthur, it's
offer
your
that.
office. Can I interrupt a moment, Ruth?
Yeah.
Can I, John, Arthur says he's on the 18th floor of your office building. Are you on the 18th floor of his office building? Your office?
I looked 5 minutes ago and he wasn't there.
Well, he's on the phone and he says he is. What should we do? Let Ruth say what she's going to say and then take a little break?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, RU has inspired Zero Waste San Diego to do a one-day conference based on the same methodology. You get 10 minutes and you're up and out, and it's really doing very well and very popular. So the format works. So thank you for that, Arthur.
Okay, well, let's take a 5-minute break and I will go down and see if I can find Arthur and bring him back.
David, when's your move?
He says it's a work in progress. I had him muted. It's the near future. It's in the near future.
I was wondering the same thing.
Moving right along.
Nice to see you, David.
Thank you.
He's waiting for the weather to get better in Iowa.
They have snow.
It's so funny that we see each other in this fashion, but we don't see each other in person. You know, there are members of the board that I've been working with for a year and I've never met them in the person. We won't meet in person until next Tuesday. Very strange.
Thank you.
One other thing I want to add about recycling update is the luncheon, where there were always pies of pie tins and all different kinds of non-paper, they were definitely sustainable types of dishes and everything. And I was always impressed by that and all the organization that went into making sure that that was there. Yeah, it was a full court press. Yep.
So I have found Arthur. He is now sitting in front of the camera and he's going to talk about how RU started and how it evolved.
But will you do us a favor and take your mask off?
Want me to take my mask off?
Yeah,
Just hanging around.
there we go. Thanks.
Hi, Max. Hi, Susan.
Oh, yeah.
5 of us, huh? What a crowd. Well, now Lousy is free.
Not 13.
Who?
13 of us.
14? Oh, more people. Oh, people with names, but not. Okay, how did RU get started? The way I remember it was that it came up about 1994 that we needed to have a conference because we needed to make some money. And nobody could think of any kind of hot topic for us to consider. So when I used to be in the equal employment business, I at some point dreamed up a conference called EEO Update. And that was basically things that were going on in the early days of the civil rights legal side. And we had a conference, and it turned out okay. The key principles of RU was that we wanted people who were local. We wanted people who were essentially trying out things that nobody had ever done before. When the state passed a law saying that we should all have, reduce our waste and stuff like that, we didn't have any, they didn't really have, they had no framework. They had no, it's not like when you change a medication and everybody learns something from some smart guy who figures out something. Here, we're the people who are figuring it out. People like Mary Lou and Dan and me and a whole bunch of Steve Loutsey, everybody. So we called it, and the rule was only gets to talk 10 minutes. And everybody loved that. Somebody said it was like speed dating. That was one of my favorite comments about it. And I relied on people like Steve and Ruth Abbe and others to figure out who was doing something that was new and different. And then I pulled it all together, but I was by no means the key person or the sole person. But I came up with the idea. It worked out. We had 35 people the first time, and over at Lakeside Garden Center, it grew and grew. I think now, last time I heard at Fleet and Salvage, it was around 350, and it just became a very popular thing. So I'm pleased with what I did. I didn't screw it up. So that's all. I don't know if I have anything else to say or not. Maybe the main thing is nothing important has happened since we started this program. Nothing that's so drop deadish that that became the topic you needed to run a conference on. I think we had one special conference with a name on it at some point in that period, but I can't, in this period, that period, early days.
Tell us about the very first one. Do you remember the very first one?
What I remember was in, if you go into the Lakeside Garden Center, you went to the left-hand room, folding chairs. We had about 35 people, and everybody liked it. And after a couple of years, we moved over to the state building. Then we moved to the city. Then we came out, and the way we got to Freight and Salvage is kind of an interesting story, which was that I left it up to somebody else to talk to somebody at the state office building here. And I went in a couple of days earlier to sort of make sure it was all okay. And they said, "Oh no, we have the whole, it's all spoken for that day." I said, "Holy shit," I said. So I ran around. I really didn't know what to do, but I did go to Freight and Salvage, and one thing led to another, and they found a place for us. It was pretty expensive, but everybody liked it, and easy, close to the Berkeley, the Mart Station Center. Thank you. I've talked long enough, Mary Lou. Thank you.
You done good, Arthur. And Ruth pointed out that this format has been imitated by others. It's a good format.
Well, I have not been, I've been to a couple of RUs before the COVID, and I can't remember them all, but I sort of felt we got away from the new and different. And we got away from people were talking. I felt we were listening to a lot of salesmen sometimes, people who had a program somewhere, Texas or someplace, and they were up there telling what a great thing they'd done. But I think what we really wanted was our own little crowd. Because, to be honest with you, I don't think the state has learned anything in all of this the time that's passed. Do they really understand how to run local government programs? I don't think so. But they screwed up the bottle bill pretty bad, so I think it's really, and because this is a very innovative section of the country and the state, where it happens, for better or worse. Over.
just have it under the deal.
I'll go over here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Robin.
thank you.
Mary Lou wanted me to say something, which is, anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, about, I don't know how many weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago, there was a big conference down in San Diego organized by Laura Anthony and Rick Anthony, and they followed the RU format, 10 minutes, lots of speakers, speed dating, and it went off very well. So it has, the format has been copied and it's working.
It's quite a legacy.
Yes.
A lot of clapping, Arthur. Okay, so the last item on tonight's agenda, another milestone, has to do with the Portola Hills landfill, which has a little bit of similarity to the Altamont case, except for the fact that we didn't win this one. And the reason why we didn't win this one is really a cautionary tale, is the reason I wanted to tell it. And David worked a lot on this. David gets a lot more credit than anybody else on the NCRA end for the successes on the Portola Hills case. So I want to acknowledge that. And David, I might tell the story differently than you, but I'm going to tell it the way I remember it. And not only did I not going to tell it from memory, I looked up at the source records today, like Ruth, looking up Altamont. These things happened 20 years ago. In Ruth's case, 30 years ago. And things that I think I remember turned out not to be the case always. So I want to be historically accurate about this. So in the middle part of the 2000s, the landfill owner at Portola Hills decided they wanted to do what Altamont tried to do and expand their landfill. At the time, it was owned by Republic Services. Later, Republic sold it to Waste Connections. And it was similar to the Altamont situation. You had a locally connected, well-funded waste hauler with a lot of political connection who had obtained who had gotten 3 votes on the Board of Supervisors to approve their expansion project. That's tough to fight against. David was relentless. In my view, David sort of took it as a personal insult that they wanted to expand the landfill, because he would say over and over again, the enemy of recycling is cheap landfill tipping. And that's what they had. They were so cheap that haulers from San Jose were logging all the miles up to Sassoon to dump their trash, because it was so cheap to do it, burning up all manners of fossil fuels, doing untold harm to the environment besides the landfill. That's what we were up against. David wanted to do a CAW case because that was the triggering event that ultimately won the Altamont situation. I'm kind of ambivalent about CAW. CAW doesn't require any kind of environmental purity. You can have a bad environmental project and still pass muster under CAW. All CAW requires is that the project proponent write a report that details all the potential environmental harms that the project could cause and propose mitigations for them. That's all it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give the elected officials and the members of the public enough information so that they can make an intelligent decision about the project. So when you hear about someone suing under CAW, as NCRA did with Altamont, it's claiming that the environmental document was inadequate. It wasn't good enough. David wanted to bring that suit, and I was kind of ambivalent about it. So we found a local advocacy group called Protect the Marsh, and we found a local attorney, Amber Veerling, to bring that case, and they won. There was a hearing before Judge Paul Beeman, who I'll come back to in a moment, and he found that the environmental impact report that had been approved by the County Board of Supervisors wasn't good enough. And Judge Beeman said, go back and fix these problems. So time passed. The landfill owner was supposed to go back and get a better environmental document, but they didn't do it. So we brought a second action and asked Judge Beeman to issue a writ of mandate because they hadn't done what he told them to do. And he agreed to that. So now NCRA's up 2-0 in the count. But all we've done is criticize the environmental document. And finally, no surprise, the landfill operator got the ER right and got their Tame County majority to approve it. Well, that wasn't in the Altamont game plan. That wasn't going to get us anywhere. We'd won the secret cases, but it wasn't enough. But David found something better, and this is all David. David found that there was a voter initiative that had been passed, I think in 1984. It was Measure E on the ballot, and 68% of the voters in Solano County voted to approve it. And it was a ballot initiative that limited the importation of garbage into Solano County to 95,000 tons a year. Solano County had two landfills. It had the Portia Hills landfill, then owned by Waste Connections, and it had the Hay Road landfill owned by Recology. So the county had never enforced this Measure E. And David and I thought, well, that's worth a shot. We should file an action to enforce Measure E. And NCRA filed an action, and the Sierra Club later joined it, and David's group, SPRLDEF, joined it. And we came to another hearing in front of Judge Beeman, whose courtroom sat in Vallejo. And the issue was whether the initiative was constitutionally permissible or not. The garbage haulers argued, well, no, it infringes on interstate commerce. Well, that wouldn't have been a bad argument, except David unearthed the data that found, no, all the stuff that's going to this landfill comes from within California. And if you're looking at the Federal Commerce Clause, it regulates interstate commerce, but not intrastate commerce. So I thought we had a shot, and we finally come to a big hearing in front of Judge Beeman. And the day before, Judge Beeman who's a liberal guy, had issued his thoughts. He said, I'm going to ask questions at tomorrow's hearing. Here are the things that I'm going to be asking about. And so we show up the next day, and it's me and the two other lawyers on our side. And the waste haulers have a lawyer fly all the way out from Washington, D.C. He's in a big firm there. And so the judge proceeds to do kind of like I do on the Zoom calls, where I pick people out and ask questions. He would ask different questions of the different lawyers. And it kind of got murky. There was discussions about things like prudential standing that I don't think you want me to talk about, statute of limitations, various different things. And the judge was stuck on something. The judge was stuck on a 1938 California Court of Appeal case, which involved a ban on waste importation into a certain city. And the court in that case in 1938 said, no, that's unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Well, the 14th Amendment was enacted after the end of the Civil War. It was designed to put people of different races on an equal footing. That's what the equal protection meant. And in the 60 years since this 1938 court decision, the US Supreme Court had more clearly defined the scope of protection in the Equal Protection Clause. And it was about race, and it was about age, and it was about gender, but it wasn't about landfills, and it wasn't about garbage. So we finally convinced Judge Beeman that he was off base with that. And after about an hour, he finally turned to me and asked what I thought was the key question in the whole argument. He said, Mr. Moore, is there some policy in the state of California that favors recycling? Well, so that was like hitting it off a lot of tea. Of course there is, Your Honor. There is a statute that says specifically that landfills cause environmental harm, incineration causes environmental harm, and both of them waste a lot of virgin resources. So they're bad. Not only that, it's now a policy of the state that before you can send anything to a landfill, you have to try to recover it somehow. You have to reuse it or compost it or recycle it or do something. And until you try all those things, it ain't waste. That's a policy of the state of California, I said, and that was exactly the policy that the voters of Solano County voted to approve. That was enough. That was the end of the story. Judge Beeman grants our petition and finds that the county should start enforcing Measure E. So great, we win. But no, because as we've heard in earlier stories, these things play out over years. We're a volunteer group going up against highly paid consultants and lawyers and everybody else with big financial stakes in it. And Waste Connections wasn't going to leave it alone, and Recology wasn't going to leave it alone. So we win before Judge Beeman. We're now 3-0 for NCRA. Then the waste haulers filed a federal lawsuit saying that what Judge Beeman did was unconstitutional. We get that dismissed. So now we're 4-0. But we still haven't won because the waste haulers have a trick up their sleeve, which they use a lot. And we don't know the details of how they did it here. But essentially, they convinced a tame legislator by the name of Fiona Ma. She's now the state treasurer. She'd like to be governor, or she'd like to be U.S. senator. I urge you not to let that happen. But Recology goes to Fiona Ma. We know this because the campaign contributions she has to report. They go to Fiona Ma, and somehow or other, Fiona Ma takes a dead bill late in the legislative session, changes it completely, bypasses the committees that get to vet every other bill that goes through the legislature, pushes it through the houses, floor of both houses, and gets the Governor Brown to sign it. And that bill eliminated any ability of local restriction on waste importation. It effectively annulled all these victories that we'd had. So in the end, we lost. We won 4 times, we still lost. It's a tough fight to take, but you know, we do these, we just got to do it. We got to do it one step at a time. And that's my story about Portia Hills. And David, if you have other observations, please tell us.
Not any major alternative explanation, except to say that on the assembly side, which was the more liberal house, the lead committee, as it was over the Senate Bill 450 dispute and the passage of AB 939, had the leadership of former assemblyman from Palo Alto, Byron Scher, who became a state senator and has since gone on. But by the time of about 2011, when the Fiona Ma bill came, it came to the same resources committee, and somebody who is still very much carrying progressive water on a lot of matters, representing both Alameda and Contra Costa County, where Contra Costa County was split and Alameda County supported the bill, basically said that she couldn't go against the people in Contra Costa County. So as a result, it's no longer possible for people in Contra Costa, Alameda, Solano, Santa Clara, San Mateo, or any other county to exercise the sovereignty of the voters. I say it's undemocratic and it's unprogressive. And I don't have to name the name, you all know. It's not just Fiona Ma.
They don't all know, David. It's Nancy Skinner. Nancy Skinner enabled this bill and enabled this action in the legislature early on, when the bill was in same language in a different number. Wesley Chesbrough also enabled this bill. And Wesley told us it was because Western Mendocino County had nowhere to put a landfill. And so we needed a bill that would stop the citizens from stopping flows of garbage from one jurisdiction into another. But I think there's blood all over the hands of Recology, the wonderful green company in San Francisco as well, because part of the reason they have reduced waste so well is that they did not own their own landfill. In this case, they had Hay Road, and Fiona Ma was representing them and the city and county of San Francisco at the time. And you know, as John said, we don't really know all the ways that this went down. but it was a dirty deal that truncated a lot of activism.
Thank you, Steve. That's more than I knew about it. But my one thought is I'm thinking about what Bob Dylan said. And, you know, this is Nobel Prize winning Bob Dylan, who says, money doesn't talk, it screams. And that's what happened in a nutshell.
I'd like to say one thing.
David's got one more thing.
Yeah, actually, it's two things. One was that Alameda County and Stopwaste put in a tremendous effort in opposition to, let's call it the Fiona Ma and Nancy S. bill. And it was not sufficient. And there was very skillful opposition from one former member of the Solano County Board of Supervisors, a man named Wayne Crom, who was active among other things in Planned Parenthood, but also did get one of the things we did get out of Altamont, which was 75 cents a ton for open space for the Solano Land Trust. There were another supervisor named Barbara Candelas and a local activist in Solano County named Jane Bogner, who were also, you know.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get on.
I should mention one more thing. One of the kumbaya moments after the Fiona Ma escape from death bill was that every year the California Refuse Recycling Council, is that the right name, Steve?
I don't know.
Anyway, they have a golf tournament in Sacramento in May. NCS attended, and NCS subsequently received a $10,000 contribution to move up the political ladder.
Dan, go Dan.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that this has monopoly written all over it. These companies that we're talking about have monopoly contracts, Recology certainly, and Waste Connections probably too. And monopoly is a really big problem in this country. And right now we have a senator, Amy Klobuchar, who is reviving the whole question of antitrust and monopoly. She has a book out called Antitrust. I'm on page 150 of it. I really like it. And I can tell you that I wrote a little squib to Neil Seldman of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And I said, Neil, we got to get monopoly on the agenda on this, because I think monopoly is one of the reasons that recycling is being hobbled and put in the back seat and generally treated very badly. And we need to get Amy Klobuchar, who has a lot of cred with Republicans of all things, because she gets them to sign on to her legislation. And we need to get her up to speed on what monopoly is doing in our field. We're the only ones that can do that. Nobody else is going to do that for us. Well, already from that, other people have started jumping in, and ILSR already had an anti-monopoly thing going. So you should all save tune, because I think this could become, if we all join in and say monopoly is really a serious underlying problem. And here's Potrero Hills is a great example of what happens and how dirty it can be. And people, generally speaking, don't like dirty politics. And I think right now is a good time to raise this issue.
Can I add one more thing? In particular about Nancy Skinner. As people may know, for several years, I was on the board of directors of the British Columbia Bottle Recycling and Depot Association, BCBRDA. Now I'm a senior advisor, and I can go to all the board meetings. And as everybody may know, in British Columbia, they have implemented an extended producer responsibility system that is driving recyclers to their knees and driving many, well, some out of business entirely. And one of the characteristics of the
British Columbia producer responsibility organizations is that they are monopolies. And they control things just in the tender way that you would expect your local dictator to do. They're mean and nasty and bad, and they play dirty. And now Nancy Skinner, there are some EPR bills that have been proposed for California legislation, and Nancy Skinner took a trip to British Columbia, and she was toured around the whole recycling system by the producer responsibility organizations. She did not meet with any operators, not one. And she then came back, and Ruth Abbe and I tried to get a phone meeting with her, and the best we could do was to get a small meeting with one of her aides, who said to us, yeah, that's nice. Thank you for your opinion. And so just everybody should understand where the cards lie.
So since you bring up monopoly, Dan, I wanted to relate something that happened in Portia Hills that I don't know that is commonly known. So I'll just mention it. I mentioned that Republic Services owned the landfill. Republic and Allied then merged. Now, when two big companies within one industry decide to merge, the Department of Justice gets involved, and they have an antitrust division that's very highly regarded. And so you got paper pushing lawyers at the Justice Department looking at this merger from an antitrust point of view. And their big solution, their big problem was that this merged entity was going to own too many local landfills. So they told Republic, we're not going to approve the merger unless you sell Portia Hills landfill. Waste Connections was a big company in the Northern California area, and they snapped it up at a cheap price. And then to boot, the Justice Department paper pushers actually opposed our lawsuit in the Measure E case, because they had struck their own position. They wanted to preserve the integrity of the landfill business. They wanted to protect everybody, all the general public, from monopolies. And so their solution was to have the landfill sold to Waste Connections. That was the monopoly connection. And
who was president at that time?
Well, it's 2000 and...
Was it George H.W. Bush?
2006 or 7, so yeah, I guess.
Because
that would be George W.
Okay, George W. Bush. Well, if it was George W. Bush or Trump, either one, that has been a period of extremely lax anti-monopoly stuff going on. And it's likely that those lawyers were fundamentally pro-monopoly people.
Well, but that
to some
happened
extent
during the Clinton administration as well.
Yeah, there was some of that,
You
but
know, there's
Clinton was
been
better.
the neo-libs are just as monopolistic as
No, they're not. Not as much. I mean, you can argue that they're still bad, and I would probably agree. But nevertheless, there is a difference of degree between the administration of George W. Bush, and probably Trump as well, compared to, for example, Biden.
Well, we're not going to monopolize this discussion about monopolies.
okay.
We're still having a meeting. We have one more thing on the agenda. Portia, if you're still up.
John, can I make one comment that it's something I learned from David Tam, and it speaks to the work that you and Doug are leading on behalf of NCRA in these days, and that is what a juice bill is. David taught me this concept of a juice bill. This bill was delivered by the Democrats. Democrats are supposed to be on the side of environmental protection and 75% diversion, but a juice bill is when a moneyed interest goes to the top leadership and says, this is a bill that will help us a lot, but no one will notice. And they thought that no one would notice this bill that just precluded opposition to by citizens to landfill imports. you know, and it mainly worked for them. So just the concept is a juice bill. It's something that they think is not very harmful to their interests, where the party can make a lot of money. And that's what this bill was. And we have to keep trying to find out what really happened in this case.
Let's get a transcript of this meeting, and we can start having some, the words you just talked about are necessary to describe a phenomenon that hardly anybody knows about. But if you start using that word, the phenomenon suddenly becomes visible. And you've just done a great service, and it comes from David Tam. I'm not surprised, because he thinks about these things very deeply. I consider him to be a hero of recycling. And I'd like to end this with a congratulations to David Tam and Steve Lautsy for your longtime friendship and collaboration.
And now the term juice bill has gone into my vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the start of something right there. I've seen things like this get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Portia, are you still up for being interviewed?
She's got her hand up.
Portia.
I'm gonna take mine now.
No, I can't see her or hear her.
I'm on an iPad, which is a little harder than computer.
You still want to be interviewed?
If you're game, I'm game. I could go either way. What would you like to do? It's 8:15. What time do you usually close?
We usually close about right now, and we've been going for quite a while. But you know, you're here, and we'd like to hear about the future of NCRA, but we don't have to.
Well, why don't I do a little something about what's going on right now, and then you can interview me later.
Okay, go.
All right. Oop, low battery. So I don't know if you all know, but I am now the executive director of NCRA. It's a part-time position. Matter of fact, it's just a few more days a month than what I was doing as the newsletter editor. But I wrote a budget, and we have a bigger staff with more specific tasks. So it may work out. And I'm really happy to be in this situation, because I started my career with NCRA. Dan Knapp and Nick Macesso introduced it to me when I was an intern at the Integral Urban House at 5th and Cedar in Berkeley. And I went to work for Urban Ore. I worked for Urban Ore for 2 or 3 years while I was in college and soon out of college. So I'm really happy that since I would like to retire, and when I get to 70, who knows what's going to happen, but I'm sort of bookending my career here, if you want to look at it that way, but we won't really know until we get there. And as the NCRA newsletter editor, which I was hired by Mary Lou in her last tenure as the president, my efforts 2 days a month have sort of brought some things along that might have not been so structured, because I would say, where's this, where's that, what's happening here, what's happening there. I was also on the board part of the time, most of the time, but I've been serving as a quasi staff. So I'm really pleased to be in this position. Let's just say, as soon as we agreed we were moving forward, I dove into Recycling Update, and let's just say, I think it'll be a much better event this year than it would have been if I wasn't involved. COVID adds a lot of complication, as Steve Lautsy will confirm from a recent meeting we had with Freight and Salvage. One of the things I would like to bring up, if I may, is that I would like the former executives and board members to be more involved, and that is happening, as you can tell from the people here, but I would like there to be some kind of more formal setup. But we're also talking about having a leadership development program in which we teach people what's involved with being involved with NCRA in committees, and how to run meetings, and how to handle minutes, and how to deal with Robert's Rules of Order and such. And so maybe some of you would be willing to help with that development, basically for developing new leaders for NCRA, but also for the recycling industry. What do you guys think of that idea? Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it. It turns out David Kruger and I came up with it at similar times without knowing it, but that's something I'll be working on once we recover from the big effort of getting recycling update rolling. And if you're not registered, let me know, okay? So I guess we're going to end there because my little iPad here is shutting down.
So is NCRA paying you on the level that CRA used to pay their executive directors?
No, but let's just say it's more than I was being paid as the newsletter editor, and not anywhere as much as I make as a consultant. But it is my intention to cultivate, grow the position and the pay as we go along, so that it's so that the payment is equal to my level of competence. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, well, join us for a green drink after RU.
I totally plan to. I'm actually going to get a hotel room for 2 nights instead of 1, so I can go to green drinks and not be rushed out to go home.
Good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Again, it's the second Tuesday of every month, 5 o'clock for cocktails, 5:30 for the show. Bonnie and I are, as we speak, working on an agenda of interesting shows to have for the remainder of the year. And so we don't know what next month will be, but you'll know when we know, and it'll be interesting. Thanks.
And for those of you that don't know, Bonnie is one of the staff members I referred to earlier. And she's a wonderful young person with all sorts of experience with social media. She's been working with John, if you didn't already know.
Thanks, Portia. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
You.